Thank you, everyone. So for those of you that don't know me, and hopefully that's a small number at this point, I've been with Hyper since the beginning. And Hyper is a technology provider for banks and credit unions that they use to bank highly regulated industries, not just cannabis. As it stands today, of the less than 40 in the U.S. truly doing this to scale, our clients make up over half of those in the U.S. So we've had a unique perspective on this industry over the last, 5.5, 6 years. I've been fortunate to meet some amazing people along the way. These are two of my favorites. So I have Chris Call here, who's the CEO of North Bay Credit Union in Santa Rosa. They were one of the first entrants into the California market to bank it openly. And I have, obviously, Fiona Ma, the treasurer of the state of California, who I've gotten to know very well over the years. So I'd like to start with just kind of giving everyone a background. And Fiona, I'd like to start with you. Can you kind of tell the group how you got involved in this issue and how long ago?
Yeah, I think we're going on year 5 right now. I was elected, my last position was on the State Board of Equalization, and we found out that under Prop 215, we were supposed to collect sales taxes from the dispensaries. However, when I got to the board, nobody knew how much we were collecting. And so it took about 8 months, 2 people scrolling through websites and media publications and looking at weed maps and other online services to figure out that we were not collecting as much tax as we probably should have been collecting based on the numbers that were reported out there. So I started going around, doing tours, meeting with folks, asking, number one, do you know that you have a sales tax responsibility? Most of them did not. And I found out it was because attorneys and accountants, CPAs, payroll providers, right? No one was supposed to be working with this industry. And the second big elephant in the room was the lack of banking access. People said, well, we'd love to pay our taxes, but we can't open up a bank account. Is there anyone that will give us a bank account? And so that's where we met Tyler in Colorado, and they were ahead of us in terms of passing their legislation and banking access. And so that's, I think we met probably 4 years ago. And since then, we know that there are some banks that are willing to bank the industry, certainly not enough. Things were working under the Obama administration, and since this new administration came in, things have been a little bit, touch and go, which kind of set off the market a little bit in terms of, hey, should we move forward? Should we not? Are we going to get in trouble? Will we be protected? And so that's where we met, and then I can talk a little bit about where we're at since then, but, Tyler and Hyper have been really great about partnering with different banks, helping them do their due diligence. And honestly, when people say, is there a bank that's open? I go, hold on, I got to call someone. And Tyler is the person I call. So for those of you in the room, you know the little secret. But that's kind of where, we get our information. And I know that Mr. Call here is one of the brave ones here in California that we applaud and we support, and we are going to do whatever we can to make sure that he is successful. So.
And that's a great segue into just to give you guys a little background. The first time I heard this story, Chris and I were actually sitting with a regulator, and he told the story of how his institution got into the industry, and candidly, my jaw was on the floor. And I think it's an important story for everyone to understand and hear. So, Chris, if you wouldn't mind kind of giving people background on how you guys got into this space.
Sure. We had been watching the cannabis industry develop for a number of years in the medicinal realm. And when Prop 64 passed and it was going to become law in January of 2017, we decided that it was time to take a stand as a community steward. We consider our credit union really a advocate of our community and the members of our community, and we could see that the amount of cash that was unbankable because of the financial institution's refusal to take it was causing a real public safety issue. And so we didn't want to be part of the problem, we wanted to be part of the solution. So we spent several months developing a a program and doing our investigation. We spoke with our regulators, we spoke with legal advisors, and established a pilot program to take a minimal number of accounts. It was about a month after we started taking those accounts that one of our longtime, really valuable members of the credit union was the victim of a home invasion. The criminals who invaded his home took his wife, and his children hostage, and they were after some cannabis money that they thought was on the site, which turns out wasn't the case at all. And because he was unable to produce this cash, they ended up shooting him and murdering him. So to us, that was the moment that galvanized our resolve to make a difference in this area. We realized that we can't have people walking around our city streets with duffel bags full of cash or cash in the trunks of their car. We needed to put that money in a safe place. And so we have since increased our efforts greatly. We've added an entire compliance department and process by which we can vet and take on cannabis operators for bank accounts. And we've grown over the last couple of years rather significantly. So right now we're banking probably over 70 accounts, and hope to be able to continue to bring on more.
So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, in your experience banking this industry, what are the biggest challenges of banking this space that you've found over the last couple of years?
Well, so we're finding that the number, first of all, the demand is overwhelming, and that's certainly a challenge. And we get operators from all walks of life who are wanting to participate in the green rush, right? And so we get anywhere from your uneducated pot farmer to the very sophisticated Wall Street, Silicon Valley executives who are now running firms to produce cannabis. And so the diversity has been a challenge. We've had to just educate ourselves on the whole range of licensing options and requirements. 3 different agencies to deal with on the licensing side has been a challenge, and making sure that the temporary licenses are renewed and permanent annual licenses are obtained, and making sure that every deposit that enters into the financial system is the result of a state legal sale of cannabis. So it's a very manual process, which we've tried to augment with some technological solutions, and Hyper is helping us out in that regard. But it's still a very manual process, and can be sometimes overwhelming to deal with it all.
Fiona, at the state level, from a government standpoint, have you seen a change, either positive or negative, in kind of the stigma with cannabis in banking as it relates to that?
Yeah, I definitely have seen a definite change. Under Governor Jerry Brown, he did not really want to deal with cannabis, and we had a whole bunch of bills that got to his desk or almost to his desk, and he was like, please hold it, I don't want to deal with it, I'm going to veto those bills. So Gavin Newsom got elected last November, I got elected last November. As you know, he kind of led the effort to pass Prop 64, so he definitely is very positive. But we also are facing some legislators who don't understand that, for example, taxes are too high. So Rob Bonta had a bill that would have reduced the distribution tax from 15% to 11%, and would have suspended the cultivation tax for 5 years until cultivators kind of got on board and started understanding, how to file your taxes and comply. But that bill did not get very far because many legislators said, well, why are we reducing taxes when we just passed Prop 64? Shouldn't we let it work and see whether it's going to work? unlike many of you sitting here in this room, it's like taxes are too high. That's what's keeping people in the illegal market. So we still have legislators that aren't completely on board or understand what's going on. So I encourage you to invite your assembly members and your senators to come and see what you do. Tell them, be very honest about some of the difficulties, and hopefully next year when some of those bills do pass, they'll get a better chance. One big bill that did pass, Reggie Joynes Sawyer's bill, will now allow California cannabis companies to deduct all of their expenses, all of your necessary and ordinary business expenses. So unlike at the federal level under 180E, you can only take cost of goods sold against your revenues. In California, you will be able to take all of your expenses now, which we think that is going to help bring some folks into the legal market. And the last thing I would just add is the governor just appointed a new regulation, what do I call her? Department of Business and Oversight, regulator, DBO. He's a new gentleman. I haven't even met him yet. I don't think he has a background in cannabis or banking, so it's going to take him a little while to get up to speed. But the bill, Senator Hertzberg and I were working on SB 51, which would allow a limited license cannabis license for state chartered banks such as North Bay to apply for a license and be able to bank the industry, is sitting right now waiting until January. The governor has committed to working with us on some sort of solution that we can propose in January to help alleviate and deal with this banking crisis.
So Fiona, on that note, and you know, with California being the 5th largest economy in the world, are you getting calls from other treasurers or other government folks in other states that are looking for guidance on these issues as their markets launch?
Yeah, so I just started in January. I just attended my 2nd National Association of State Treasurers conference last week in Naples, Florida. Or was it this week? We just got back? This week. Sorry, I just got back Tuesday. Time flies. But we were able to pass a resolution by the state treasurers just supporting the Safe Banking Act, which is the compromise that I think most of the treasurers could get on board. However, the first clause was, we do not support legalization, right? Because some of the Republicans didn't want this to be a signal that all of the 50 state treasurers supported legalization of cannabis. So we did get that resolution passed, and many of us are doing op-eds now, urging Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act.
Chris, this one's for you. We see most institutions try and talk to each other in different markets to try and get advice, try and discuss concerns, all of the above. Are you getting calls from many other institutions that are considering getting into the space in the state of California, and what are their typical concerns?
Probably about one a week. We get calls from institutions all over the country now that have heard about us from one source or another, and they want to know what we're doing, what our experience is. They want to know what steps we took to establish a program. And we're happy to help because we're not trying to protect our market share or anything. Our main concern is making our communities safe. And so this public safety issue is best resolved by having more financial institutions participate in cannabis banking. The problem that I think you're seeing is technically we're in violation of federal law, and we are committing money laundering by taking money from federally illegal entities. And a lot of banks and credit unions don't want to cross that bridge until there's a change in the classification of cannabis as a Schedule I drug. And so there's a lot of interest in preparing for the day when that happens. I don't know that we're going to see a huge movement towards banks and credit unions getting into the space until that happens.
And so on the other side, government says, we don't care what business you're in, legal or illegal, pay your taxes. And so we tell everyone we don't care, we're not going to ask, and just make sure you pay your taxes. And then we take the money in our offices. So we are, I think the state of California is the largest money launderer in the country, publicly and proudly, because we tell everyone to pay their taxes. But it is not safe for us because we're asking all of you to bring duffel bags of cash down to our different offices. We takes a lot of work for our employees to count. I mean, sometimes $400,000 in bills takes about 8 hours, and we have to count them 2 or 3 times, and then wait for the armored car to come, and they go and deposit it at Bank of America. But you guys can't open up an account at Bank of America, and you can't deposit in Bank of America. We can't even have our person sit and have a desk at Bank of America to make it easier for our office. We have to collect it in our office and then transport it to Bank of America. I mean, this is how silly the system is right now.
But Fiona, so for the audience, so they understand, states accepting taxes, that process is exempt from money laundering oversight, correct? So
Exactly.
That's why.
Exactly.
That's why
We are
Bank of
exempt from
America
money
can bank a
laundering.
state.
Legally, yes. So when our state government, local governments ask you to pay, and federal government even ask you to pay your taxes, that is legal and allowable.
And Chris kind of touched on it, and I want to kind of expand on something real quick with the audience. I get calls from operators all the time, and they say, hey, why is the credit union being so difficult? Why are they demanding all of these things? The officers of the institutions themselves have personal liability when banking an industry like this. So if a regulator walks in and Chris has done something wrong and dropped the ball, they could potentially impose a civil money penalty on him personally that can't be covered by the insurance policy of the institution. So it's not just the risk of the institution, it's also that personal liability that makes it very difficult for an institution to say, yes, let's go bank this industry.
And I wouldn't look good in an orange jumpsuit.
Right, and so, your board members normally on a bank, board members are kind of conservative people, right? Whereas at the state level, we are looking at the will of the people. The people spoke, they passed Prop 215 25 years ago. We passed Prop 64, and for many of us in elected office, this is what the people want. We should be guided by what the people have voted on. And in California, the initiative process overrules what the legislature does. So that is why we take our initiatives very seriously, but my warning to you also is if you don't really understand the initiative that is going to be on the ballot, it always costs money. And it costs money, and it means money is not going to go to other programs and services that are already out there. And they don't tell you that in the initiative process, even though many of us have been asking, hey, if you're going to put an initiative on the ballot, make sure you have a funding source. Well, people don't like that. It keeps getting killed. So we put initiatives on. It does cost money, but it also means that this is the will of the people, and that's why it goes ahead of what the legislature wants to happen.
So, Chris, one of the biggest gripes I get from operators is the time to get an account set up, the underwriting process. Can you talk a little bit about that process and why you guys handle it the way that you do?
Yeah, our application process is actually pretty extensive, and we require a lot of documentation. We do a very deep dive into the organization and the principles of the organization. And we have to do that. There's a term in banking called know your customer, which means you really have to know and understand who you're dealing with and who's putting money in the institution. And we're finding that with a lot of cannabis operations now, they've been operating in the black market or gray market for so long and created these shell entities in order to circumvent the banking problem. They've brought that with them into their current situation, and so we're having to dig through all of these various entities to try to figure out who's the beneficial owner of the account, what's their relationship to the management of the operations, and so forth. And then we need to make sure that it's an entirely legal operation, and so we have to get into doing site visits and making sure that they're following municipal codes as well as the state codes. So it's a very onerous process and takes, several weeks to get through that process.
And so I would say if anybody is selling a tangible personal product to an end user, you're supposed to collect and remit sales tax. Okay? That means you need to get a sales tax permit. You can go online, fill it out, and voila, you've got your sales tax permit. So on our side, it's very easy. No paperwork, very easy. Fill out a couple forms, you print out your sales tax permit, and you are officially legal in California.
So that kind of segues into the next question, Fiona, which is, what impact do you think the lack of banking has had on tax revenues in general over the last few years?
Yeah, so I think we estimated in the budget that we were going to collect about $1 billion in taxes from the industry, and I think we were at, 400 million. And it's like decreasing because with the lack of enforcement, people are like, well, I can't compete, right? Why should I pay? I'm just going to wait for them to come after me. And so as you can see, $1 billion, we're only collecting about 400 million. It is a lot of tax revenues that California is not getting.
Do you think that's a direct result of the lack of banking, or that's just a factor in the overall equation?
Well, that's a huge factor because as a CPA and an auditor, I can't audit cash. So the way we audit these businesses, if they don't have books and records, we will sit outside and have an auditor on 3 separate days count how many people go in to a dispensary, allocate a certain dollar amount, let's say $65 per person, extrapolate back 3 years, add interest and penalties, and send them a bill and hope they pay. That's the way we do audits for people who have no cash and no books and records. So if we had books and records, then we could ask for bank accounts, we could ask for credit card statements, right? That's how we can verify with a check and balance system. But right now, it's really, really difficult for government in a cash industry.
One of the things that you'll hear in our building a lot, and our institutions are now having this conversation with merchants that want to bank there. The message is always, you're in the compliance business, and it's something that CEO of our company says on a daily basis. And I think you have to view it through that lens. I get calls all the time from merchants that they sit down with a bank or credit union, they get onboarded. The bank or credit union lays out a very specific set of rules that merchant needs to abide by. They break the rules, the bank's going to shut their account down. They call me panicked. I've got to call the bank. It's a vicious cycle. So, Chris, my question to you is, have you had to terminate accounts? And what are the things that could potentially jeopardize a relationship after it's already live with you as a credit union?
We have terminated accounts, and the reason for those terminations have primarily been for lack of compliance with the guidelines and the rules that we've set forth on the accounts. We have zero tolerance for misrepresentation. We've had a couple of instances where the operator told us something that wasn't true, and we found out about it later, and that resulted in immediate termination. But once in a while we get an operator who just has trouble doing the things that we ask them to do, and it's really not worth our effort to coddle these kind of operators along when there's such a long list of operators waiting to get an account that would love to comply with anything we say. So,
and to expand on that, understand, if you're in a situation like that in this industry, don't shoot the messenger. This is coming from regulators top down. If a regulator wants to see something from a bank or credit union, they have to abide by those wishes, right? That's really the only conversation that matters in this equation. So don't take it personal. Just try and view it through the lens of compliance and do what you're asked to do, because it helps everybody. Chris, can you talk a little bit about the payment side of the fence and what you're seeing in this industry and trends and how those things potentially affect a banking relationship?
Yeah, so we service the entire supply chain from cultivator to dispensary and delivery services and whatnot. And so each type of operator has their own payment challenges. And, our goal has been to remove cash from that economic cycle to the greatest extent possible, because that's what creates the public safety issue. So if we can convert those transactions to electronic transfers, then that's going to create a paper trail for every transaction, and it's an auditable trail that we can tie back to a specific invoice or sales transaction, sales receipt. And so there's a number of payment solutions now being introduced, a lot of closed loop kind of systems where you sign up for an app with a vendor, and that app will be used by the dispensary, for example, to transfer money directly from your bank account and deposit it into the dispensary's bank account. That's assuming that the dispensary has a bank account. So we're working with a few of those type of vendors. We're finding, however, that a lot of there's some misconception about what cannabis operators can do in the form of accepting payments, and finding a lot of operators are still under the belief that they can accept credit card purchases, which is not the case. And so we've had to educate those businesses that has to be outside of the Visa, MasterCard, Amex brand portfolios in order to make those legal sales.
And to expand a little bit on that too, I don't know how many of you are aware of the recent delivery lawsuit in the state of California, but essentially the branded card networks are opposed credit or debit, does not matter. And what happened was a large delivery provider in the state of California was sued for fraudulent and unfair business practices because they were offering credit cards. And essentially what their competitors sued them for was, hey, if we can't legally run those products, we've got to be fraudulent to have access to them. That puts us at a huge disadvantage. When that lawsuit hit, I started getting calls from attorneys representing retailers. And just to forewarn everybody, it's coming to the retail side of the fence. So if I'm a dispensary and I've done things right, and I'm not using those forms of payment or offering those to my member base, and my competitors are, I now have a legal right potentially to sue them for the same issue. My fear is that wave of litigation is about to hit in a pretty significant way in the industry. So just be cautious of that, because it's, like I said, it's coming. So let's see here. Fiona, how do you anticipate the banking problem changing over the next couple of years in California? Better, worse?
Well, it's got to get better. It's got to get better. Yeah. We have an attorney general right now who has filed at least probably on 60 lawsuits against the federal government. He hasn't had to file one on behalf of the cannabis industry yet, so hopefully he doesn't have to, but I'm very encouraged by the numbers that passed in the Safe Banking Act, the strong bipartisan support in Congress. The bill is going to go, it's called a Perlmutter bill. It's going to go to the state, the U.S. Senate is where we normally have problems. But I would encourage everyone, I think we should do a big letter writing campaign, op-eds, letters to the newspaper. You know, elected officials do care about what their constituents are saying, what is printed in the media. But if we could get that passed through the Senate, the U.S. Senate, I think we will definitely have turned a huge corner, and people like Chris will actually be a lot, I think, a lot freer and have more capacity to accept more accounts without the fear of any sort of retaliation or retribution.
Well, I would just comment that for institutions like us, we've already accepted that risk. And the passage of the SAFE Act, if it happens, will hopefully provide some assurance to the institutions that have been sitting on the fence and waiting for some sort of signal from the federal government that they're not going to be the target of federal prosecution. The SAFE Act is certainly a step in the right direction, but it's only a minor step, in my opinion, in terms of getting access to banking for the industry. I think that's really only going to happen when cannabis is deschedulized.
And I think, again, to expand on what Chris is saying, there's a word that's used throughout that document that makes it less impactful than it should be for a bank or credit union, and the word is solely. So a bank or credit union cannot solely be penalized for banking the state legal cannabis industry. Well, if I'm an examiner and I come into an institution that's banking the cannabis industry that's done something wrong, they've inevitably violated any number of BSA AML laws that I can couple with the fact they're banking cannabis. So I think it's important for people to understand that the impact of that, while it will have a positive impact, I think we all need to temper the expectations of what that will do for the open markets as it relates to banking in this industry. So, you know, again, to Chris's point, this is as much a highly regulated industry problem as it is a cannabis problem. And I think that's what people are missing. Now, the Senate may make revisions to reflect that, and there's indications that they will. But I think it may have a tough road in the Senate, so let's keep our fingers crossed and try and support it. I want to turn it over to the audience for some questions because, you know, typically on this topic there are a myriad of questions. So there's a microphone right there if you wouldn't mind using.
Once the cash goes into the institutions, how are the growers able to use it? Just like any other bank, are they able to use it? Investing into other things? What are your capabilities?
So we treat all deposits into the credit union just like any other normal business operation. Once it's found to be a legal deposit of money, it's yours to do with whatever you need to do with it. We do monitor both expenses as well as revenues that are coming in, just to verify that there's not something unusual or unexpected that we would anticipate from a business of that type. But, you know, you pay your bills, pay investors, pretty much it's your money. You can do what you want.
The liability falls on the institution taking the monies in. Once it's in the system, you know, as Chris said, it's free to move about. Yeah.
So we have taken a position that we will only do deposit activities. Lending activities are something that we're not comfortable with just because of the federal ability to seize collateral if they wanted to. And so we're going to hopefully try to help the industry through the deposit function. I know there's a lot of lenders that are now popping up throughout the state and elsewhere who are trying to provide loan opportunities for cannabis operators.
Yeah, and we have a whole myriad of programs at the state level. I always say we have money, so I really love my job because people are happy to see me because we give out grants, loans, and bonds, but unfortunately, they're not available for the industry right now.
So I'm curious, given that technically federal laws, perhaps there's federal backbone involved in sending wire transfers and things like that. What's the relationship like with the and you know to be tell do they show up? What does that look like?
Yeah, good question. Actually, about 6 months ago, I called the local FBI office and invited them to come take a tour of what we were doing and, you know, spend an afternoon with us watching how we dealt with these accounts. And the agent, who was a financial crimes agent, said, well, let me get back to you. And about a week later, she called back and said, well, we appreciate the offer, but we're not going to come. And I think the reason, she didn't say this, but I just don't think they want to give any kind of appearance of approving what we're doing because it is still federally illegal. But they're certainly aware of what we're doing, and we're providing a very important paper trail that otherwise would not exist for these entities. So I can't imagine them coming after us for any kind of prosecution when we're aiding their own efforts to regulate the industry.
And we, when we Treasurer John Chung, my former predecessor, he convened a working group, cannabis banking working group. You spoke at one of the panels, and it was 9 months. We invited the federal government to come and participate. They respectfully declined. We're going to go through another round of public banking discussions as well, and they say they're going to participate. They may or may not participate, but it's not don't ask, don't tell, but if they're not calling us, that's a good thing, in my opinion.
I know some institutions that have filed over 3,000 SARs a year banking this space, and those are suspicious activity reports that are required by FinCEN for any institution banking the space. They have 3 SAR tiers. The most, I'm going to say, challenging of which is the termination SAR, which means an institution had to shut down an account. I asked the CEO of this institution if they were ever contacted by FinCEN or have at any point over the last 3-4 years. Never once have they contacted the institution, even though they've been filing that many SARs per year. So they've kind of stayed a little removed in most cases.
I have a question in regards to being a landowner. Is that across the line of regular banks probably not going to accept money?
Yeah, so we would consider we would consider you an ancillary MRB, marijuana-related business account, because you're receiving revenue from a cannabis operation. And so the requirements for banking are a little bit less severe for those accounts because you're not required to have a license. You're not a plant-touching operator. But we do have to do a significant amount of anti-money laundering kind of compliance work because ancillary accounts like CPAs, attorneys, landlords can often be used to launder money. So we just need to make sure that everything is according to, the contracts or leases or things of that nature.
Last question, since we're in new business, do you have a certain time that you have to do business?
Yeah, well, we've kind of opened that up more as we've gained more experience and established our infrastructure. We like I say, we've got such a huge demand that we would prefer to only deal with the business owners that have been operating for some time and have a historical track record. Startups are more difficult because there's not the financial history or history of filing tax returns, things of that nature. But in some cases, we have chosen to deal with those kind of individuals.
Chris, geographically, how far should we be?
Well, as a credit union, we have a field of membership requirement. For us, it's basically the North Bay area, or you can qualify for membership by membership in one of our affiliated organizations. And we've been able to qualify members in Southern California, for example, under those criteria.
Tax receipts you mentioned before, versus $1 billion. Do you think that the black market reduced the anticipated retail market? What would the retail sales there?
I think a number of factors went into it. Number one, not enough people are registering like they should. Okay. Number two, they're not registering because they're still waiting for their local license to get their state license. So why should they register with us if they aren't really doing business right now? And then after they get their licenses, there's a whole host of other state agencies they have to deal with, right? And so taxes are one of them. But I still think there has been more companies now deciding to stay in the illegal market versus come forward because the ones that are complaining a lot to us, saying, hey, we're doing everything. We're paying all our people right. we're taking out the taxes, we're filing all the tax returns, yet we can't compete with these 4 stores or people that are running it out of, their house. They just can't compete. And what are we going to do about it? And so that is a legitimate concern. And all the agencies, we don't have enough people to enforce the market. We would like them to, but there's also another thinking that, hey, let the market, come up a little bit, grow up before we start enforcing. But it seems like at this point, there is that movement at the state level, at the governor's level especially, and others, that we should support those who are doing the right thing and not support those who are not. But it's going to be very difficult. Like Los Angeles, I don't have the numbers in Los Angeles, but Los Angeles, the numbers are like crazy. How many people are actually in full compliance and people who are not. San Francisco is a little different because when we, Prop 64 passed, basically all of the dispensaries were grandfathered in, and these were more sophisticated industry folks. They're used to paying their taxes. We know who they are in the neighborhood because San Francisco is so small. Like, we know exactly who is out there and who is legal and not legal. So that is easier for smaller jurisdictions, but like Los Angeles is probably the main one that they're trying to grapple with.
We got to wrap up, but I wanted to end with kind of a statement and then one last question. These 2 people have stepped up in a way that very few have for this industry. I was there 4.5, 5 years ago when Fiona dove into this issue before anybody was even talking about it in Colorado. I've seen her attack issues, not just this one for the state, but I mean, it doesn't matter what the issue is, she dives in and tries to fix it. And when people ask me about her, I tell them she single-handedly restored my faith in politicians because I've watched the work. I mean, legitimately. And I don't say that lightly. And Chris has stepped up in a way for this industry. Again, he was one of the first institutions to take the risk, to dive into this, to do what was right for his community and solve this problem. So my question to both of you is, how as an industry can we help support you best, and what do you need?
Well, I think all of you being here is great, but if you could just reach out to your elected officials, the more they understand your industry and some of the difficulties, the easier it is for me to help fix things when I'm over there trying to lobby for bills or sponsor legislation. A lot of them just don't know. They're just like, we don't know what's going on. Why do we need to do that? So that would be very, very helpful for all of you in the industry and me as I'm trying to move the ball.
Yeah, and from our perspective, I would say just run a clean operation and self-regulate the industry from the bad players in the industry. If you can weed out the bad players, and the industry gains a reputation of being on par with the wine industry, for example, legislatures are going to take notice of that and treat it as a regular industry, which makes it easier to bank.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. I'm sure you can grab these 2 when they get off stage for any questions.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Thank you.